Hello, young scholars. This is Mr. Martyr. I'm coming to you with Flip Classroom, comparing the political differences between Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So, in your notes, we have in class we discussed the biographies of the two men and what shaped their events. But now we're going to take a look at the political differences. So, let's get started. Number one, we said that Thomas Hobbes believes that people will always be in a state of war with one another. And very simply, what this means is that people are always going to be competing with one another, and lots of times they will put their individual interest before the group. And that can be problematic because if you're working towards a common goal or a group goal, obviously everyone wants to be working together. John Locke, on the other hand, disagrees. He said that people who have good childhood experiences can be reasonable and kind to each other. They can be reasonable and kind to each other. And what this means is that people are born, in the words of John Locke, like a blank slate. And they can be shaped and molded based on their experiences. So if you have a good childhood experience, you will become a good, productive member of society. If you have a bad childhood experiences, you may be a more cruelish person in life. Where Thomas Hobbes argues that humans are naturally cruel, greedy, and selfish towards one another. What does he mean by this? Well, he says that, again, going with what we said previously about Thomas Hobbes, he says since people will always be at war with one another, people are naturally cruel and greedy and selfish. They're going to put their interests first. And because they are cruel, greedy, and selfish, they will always be in a state of war with one another, a state of competition. So John Locke argues that humans are born like a blank slate. They are neither good nor bad. So again, you're shaped by your experiences in life. One of the examples we discussed in class is the idea of racism. We said that racism is a learned behavior. It's not taught, or it's not. You're not born with that attitude. It's a learned behavior based around the people you are surrounding yourself with. So again, a lot of what Locke offers is based on human experience. Thomas Hobbes argues that governments should have strict rules and strong leaders. Strict rules and strong leaders. And the whole purpose for this is because, again, people act out of self-interest, and they're greedy and they're cruel to one another, and therefore they can't be trusted to govern. So they have to have a strong government that is going to force people to make them obey. John Locke argues that governments exist to protect the people's natural rights. The example we said in class, in the Constitution, people have said that it is your natural right to protest or your natural right to own a gun. And if the government seems to abuse any one of these rights, they say it is the government's responsibility, or it's the people's responsibility, to overthrow that government. And that when the government stops protecting people's natural rights, then it's time for a new government. And we saw this, or we will see this, with the American Revolution. Thomas Hobbes, his idea of what's called the state of nature, he says that citizens should give up their personal freedoms for the government, or to the government. And the idea is that government will protect everyone's individual rights and securities. John Locke disagrees because he is not as trusting of government. He's more trusting of the people. According to John Locke, let's move this up here. John Locke argues that citizens should fight for their freedoms whenever necessary. So if you feel your natural rights are being violated or protested, absolutely, it is your right as a human being to protest the government and to change that government. All right. The final point for Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes argues that people should always follow the leader of their government in order to protect people from each other. Again, because people can't be trusted, because people are cruel and greedy and selfish, governments have to protect you from one another. Governments are there to keep and maintain order. John Locke argues that people have the right to overthrow the government if it's not protecting their rights. Okay, that is vital. The minute a government stops protecting your natural rights, you no longer have what's called the consent of the governed. All right. So take a minute and digest those two fundamental differences because like I said, we are going to spend a lot of time in class debating and discussing the idea of Locke and Hobbes. This is just what I call the top sheet of political differences. We're going to dive a lot deeper into those differences in class tomorrow. So if you need to go back, watch this video again. If you have any questions, you can post them to me via Google Classroom.